The future of talk is here. Power 102 Digital.
This is Hard Talk, Power 102 Digital Monday. With me, David McIntyre, is Karen Nunez Tesheira. We got some special guests that we'll be bringing on as the program rolls on. But good afternoon, Karen.
Good afternoon to you, Dave. I mean, Dave, you know why I'm saying Dave? Because actually, whilst I was waiting to come on and you were playing that Parang tune, it reminded me, at least to me, as one of the main pioneers of Parang in the very early days. He's now deceased, but I just couldn't remember the last name. Dave.
Tito Lara
Dave, who's that?
from the group that I was playing a
Way
while.
back, no, back in radio personality, one of the top radio personalities back in the day.
Talk?
Dave Alcock. Oh my God. He was to me, because I was a young person then. And I'm saying, why is he pushing this parang? And now parang has become very much part of our musical landscape and Christmas in a time when I didn't think it was going to happen. Of course it has, and it's a great, great thing. So I was looking it up when I was waiting to come on the show. But good afternoon to you, David McIntyre,
Good
not
afternoon.
Dave Alcock. And of course, to all our listeners all over the world, you mean a lot to us. You mean a lot to the show. And when Dave and McIntyre, and Dave, as you call him, Daddy Mac, and I have our conversations off air, sometimes I will call him. He has been a tremendous help to me in many ways, more than one. He reminds me of the many people who listen in. I do get some people have actually made contact with me, and I really do appreciate it. And I want you to continue because it means, as they say, and I told you that we should start the show with that. I guess it's Christmas now. Without you, there's no me. And that's really the truth, Without your support and your listening in, it simply there would be no show and there would be no purpose. And so we want you always to feel part of the show. So some of you may be shy or whatever in actually talk. We want you to come and talk. We want you to say what you have to say, ask your questions. But to start first, before we talk about who we have on the show today, I'll ask Daddy Mac to do what he does and does so well. We need to get a time when the numbers can just stay up so people can see it. And of course, I know somehow you get messages to him. I don't know exactly the technology of it, but please do that, and we shall try as best as can to answer those queries, because that's what we're here for. So, Daddy Mac, yes.
Let me give you those numbers that you can connect with us. 222-8255, 222-8255, 612-8255, 612-8255, and our toll-free number, 866-525-1099, 866-525-1099. And speaking of the people who are always locked on to the program, the market champs, Vessamine Bray, Makisi, Sophia, Mawasi, and Lauren, and of course, Mr. Rajpal. They're always locked on to the show.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate that. We appreciate it at 102 FM because, what is radio and television, what's media about? Whether it's newspaper, radio, television. Now we have both here. It gives people an opportunity to communicate with each other. And it's even better now. It doesn't have to be one way. Before it would have to be one way. But this way, we have it two ways. So you can communicate with us. So you can listen to what we have to say, and you can say, well, I don't necessarily agree with that. Or how about looking at it from this point of view? And we all of us benefit from that discourse. We all do, and I want you to be encouraged to do that. But to start off today, let me just say, of course, crime is always on the top of anybody's agenda in Trinidad and Tobago in particular. Unfortunately, it continues to dominate the news headlines, whether it is radio, whatever the media form. And so it is with us. So we got a break, if as it were, from looking at crime for the last 2 weeks when we went all the way down south to La Brea, and that was really a fantastic experience. I think it was a good learning experience. And someone sent me a photo of the tower that has this 360-degree view of the whole of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
So those are some of the things that we in Trinidad and Tobago, sometimes we go abroad and we see these things. Right here in our own country, we do not take advantage of opportunities to learn more about our culture. And that means Trinidad as well as Tobago, because Tobago too has much to offer. But today we talking again as crime, and again it does dominate the headlines, and it will continue, I suppose, because it has not gone away, or it has not gone away to any way that we can feel in any way comfortable. I've lost track of the number of murders because that's what we normally look at. I know it's crossed 500 and I think 17 by now.
Well, the last count was 520.
Oh my gosh, you just can't keep up. I mean, it's really amazing. But to get to the more to the point, so what we're having today, on the show, we've had Dr. Andy Sibusar. He's no stranger to one or two, no stranger to the media, no stranger to any form of media, because he is an expert criminologist. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to be asking him about is going to be one of the things that he did, one of the issues that he did make a comment on, as was reported in one of the newspapers. So, although he's no stranger to us, it is only right and fitting that we should give him his due in terms of his credentials to speak to us on the issue. And he is a criminologist. And as before I mentioned, and I had stated, and that he is the head of the University of the West Indies Criminology Department, head of criminology at the University of the West Indies. He has his university. He has his degree in from the University of Toronto, which is his PhD from the University of Toronto. And we know, all of us, the University of Toronto is one of the most prestigious universities that one can attend, as is UWI, by the way. And he got his MPhil from the University of Cambridge. And of course, we know that the University of Cambridge, of course, needs no introduction to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, or the world, as a matter of fact. So he's very well credentialed to speak on the topic that we're going to be speaking on. And he has done a lot of research, and his area of research, which is really relevant to what we will discuss. And unfortunately, we only have him for half an hour, but we have to say thank you for him agreeing to come on from 4:30 to 5 o'clock. So we will have him for that period. So I'm going to more or less give him the floor, so to speak, tease him with one or two issues that have come up more recently in the media, and one of which he has commented on. At least it was reported so in the media. So I would like to hear his point of view on that. But he's also not only done research, but he's also been a prolific writer. And one of his books, of which he has written, and which is very relevant to our discussion, he looks at the criminal behavior of gangs. And he looks at what the relationship between, I believe, poverty and gang membership in the Caribbean, and the issue of looking at the issue of justice. And he used the word penology, which is very fancy, I guess, for being sent to jail, the penal system. But and in any event, there are about 4 really new issues that have come to the fore. So when he joins us in the next 6 minutes, I'm going to hand it over to him. One of them was, of course, which is in the media most recently, is, first of all, I think we have looked at, they said that they have the gangs, the really gangs are yellow and red. That was one of the headlines. And I suppose what I suppose, but what the article stated, in fact, when they said yellow and red, of course, they're talking about the two major political parties and, quote unquote, the community leaders who are awarded contracts, and very significant contracts. And sometimes it's looked at, or not sometimes, it is looked at, whether rightly or wrongly, as feeding the criminology and the crime in the country. Um, that may not be a fair conclusion to come to, but certainly that is one that has been out there, and there is a proliferation of gangs in this country. The police themselves have said so on other occasions. I think in a few years back, they said there were 92 gangs. Now, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service says that has exploded, with about 8 gangs being the major gangs. I think there's something called the sixes and the sevens, and other names that they may have. But one of the things that came out in the media this week, or during this week, was the fact that whether or not the government or the governance, and I'm not getting into the political parties or anything, but whether government involvement or seeming involvement in feeding, literally, these gangs by awarding them large, significant contracts, whether in fact that can be seen as contributing to the proliferation of crime and the proliferation of gangs in this country, because it's got to have something that pulls them together. It's always going to be money at the end of the day. And whether one can see the yellow or the red, as they put it, they said, well, if the yellow and red, well, the remark was, well, they get on bad in Parliament, so what do they leave for us? But I think the speaker was talking more than that. But that was one of the big issues that came out. The other issue, of course, which I'm not going to spend too much time on, just the economic cost of criminal crime in this country. We actually got some figures put to it, and it's really, I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but it's really very disturbing when you look at how much of our revenue is diverted into fighting crime and dealing with crime. And this famous, we have mentioned it on this show, GSW. And once when someone came to me, family member said to me, well, we had 2 GSWs that after emergency. I said, what's a GSW? And that's short for gunshot wounds. So they said that it cost $350,000, according to Dr. Mencia. Actually, he's a consultant, so the correct terminology is Mr. Mencia. If you're in the English tradition of medical training, you call him Mr. Mencia because he's a consultant. But in any event, he says it's $350,000 per gunshot wound. That's what it costs the country. But what I want to ask Dr. C. Prasad more to focus on this afternoon is the issue of that so-called crime talk between the opposition and the government, and the letter of October the 14th written by the opposition leader regarding the government's response and the government's response to the crime talk. So he will be with us in another 2 minutes, and we'll wait for him to join us because I don't want to go into it. I want to let him lead into it, and I want to hear his thoughts on it on air. I'm seeing coming up.
Mhm.
Yes, Dr. Sibazar, I see. Well, you must be a pianist. I want to pronounce it correctly, pianist. Is that the correct pronunciation?
No, that's a virtual background, actually.
Oh, well, God, you shouldn't have said that. You should have made me think it was, you should have
Good
really
afternoon.
impressed me with that. I was impressed anyhow, but it's a good virtual background. But thank you so very much and joining us right on the nick of time. And so I don't know if you heard anything that I had said prior to your coming on. I may only have you for half an hour, but we're glad to have you. Oh, okay, well, I would then go straight to the major issue that I wanted you to discuss because, of course, crime is always at the top of the agenda and things are always happening. It's a very dynamic environment. And of course, you are very well respected in your field as a criminologist. I gave all your credentials, so they knew it before, they heard it again. And so what I want to really more focus on, there were 2 things that were said. And that was reported in the papers, that there are 2 gangs in Trinidad, the yellow and the red. Obviously, they reply that was a person allegedly reputed to be a gang leader and saying that he's not one, that he is a community leader and he's not involved in any of that, and so on and so on. And if you want to talk about gangs, you look in Parliament, you see it on both sides of the aisle, the way that they conduct themselves. He was suggesting they're the gang leaders. But what I really wanted to ask you about, and I think you spoke to it, and I want to hear your views and give you the floor on that, is this issue regarding the talks between the two, the opposition and the government, regarding crime talks. I think the idea itself, your views on that. Secondly, the apparent, if I may be wrong, but the apparent limitations, or I shouldn't say limitations, the areas in which the talks were going to be revolving around, and the persons who are going to be attending the crime talks, and what are your general views on that? Do you think it was helpful, or if you were to be able to give an opinion on that, as some have already done, what would you suggest? So here's the floor to you, Dr. C. Prasad.
Thank you so much. So with respect to your first question, it's a very, very good idea that the government and the opposition should actually come together. I'm very hopeful that it happens, because I'm still sensing in the communication some level of tension, some level of guardedness in how each party approaches it. And I think, in my humble opinion, that they really need to dispense with those kinds of pleasantries, if you want to put it that way, and really get down to the core of what the exercise is about. And each party really has a wealth of information to draw on. They have people that they can draw on. They have a wealth of experience that they can draw on. You more than likely would have seen some of the areas that the opposition suggested. Many of them are very, very apt areas that are definitely worth considering. But that's, of course, just a start, because those are some areas, but not all of the core areas. But we do need to start somewhere. So I'm optimistic that really we would put party politics aside. We would recognize that we need to collaborate. And for some things, we need to come to and to develop a shared understanding, so that in going forward, when the time for implementation reaches, we don't run into those stumbling blocks where we're fighting each other in Parliament to pass the required legislation or to do what is required to actually get the job done. Because the bottom line is, if we don't do what is required, things will continue as is, which means they will get worse, and it will be paid for in the blood of innocent people, right? In terms of who is actually supposed to be participating, I'm not sure of the exact identities of the person. I know there was a question of an imbalance about 5 from the government versus 4 from the opposition. Again, in my humble view, I don't see that really as a key issue that should stop the negotiations, because this is not really something where things are being put to the vote, at least based on my understanding of it. So it's not that the government is really crafting it so that there's a built-in majority. We can't think of it that way, right? Really, it's more supposed to be an open discussion. So even if we have 4 versus 5, it shouldn't really matter. We can have an open discussion with 4 and 5. That's better than no discussion at all. So we need to move past that stumbling block. And as I said, I'm not sure of the identity of the persons who will be part of it. It does seem like a limited amount of persons, though. But if that's what it takes to get the ball rolling, at some point, however, we need to include a wider range of stakeholders. We need, for instance, to have the police represented, the judiciary represented, the Ministry of National Security represented, etc., etc. There are a lot of stakeholders who have an important role to play in this particular scenario, whether it's intelligence agencies, you name it. We need to bring them on board, get their input, so that they are part of the co-creation process, if you will. This is a term that USAID uses, but it really refers to a creation of something and coming up with a bunch of ideas that everybody's on board with, or the majority of persons are on board with, and have actually had a hand in the development of these ideas. So you find that once...
Sorry,
yes, go ahead.
No, because I was... Okay, so these are the things that I might be probably I'm maybe not up to date with any developments on this. But you see, for the person looking in from the outside, um, one of among the criticisms. Well, first of all, let me ask you, what are the topics? Because when I looked at what I thought to be the topics for discussion, it seemed to be centered around legislation. And I do recall, and somewhere when I do my research, that the Prime Minister, in response to something that the opposition leader said, I can't remember what the legislation was, but he did say, you can pass as much legislation as you want, it's the enforcement that matters. So
And
what I'm asking is that, one, I get the impression that one of the concerns is even the topics that are going to be covered in the discussion, whether in fact they're really going to bear any meaningful fruit, because the situation with the crime in this country is, I mean, even I just read a article just before I came on. The Express was talking about the level of crime detection, and that some people probably don't even worry to report crimes, and you might get the lowest you might get the highest level of crime detection when it comes to car theft, because people have to report their cars being stolen for the insurance purposes. So you see, maybe that's the reason. So the question I'm really asking is, in your view, are the topics really, because that seems to be one of the criticisms, that are those topics really, which seems to be legislative. I don't know, you can enlighten me, because I tried to find out exactly what were the topics, and I saw a suite of legislation, and I was wondering if that
right.
is it, and if that you feel that is going to take us anywhere. I mean, I'm not sure.
Right. So you're right that several bits of it are legislative in nature. Now, legislation is important, but it definitely goes hand in hand with implementation. You can't have one without the other. And legislation without implementation will fail, because it's just words on paper if you don't put it into practice, or you don't have the ability to put it into practice, right? So legislation is definitely important, but what might actually matter more is that we put mechanisms in place, especially for those pieces of legislation that are really important, to make them work effectively. And a good example might be the anti-gang legislation. It's there, it's a robust piece of legislation, yet we have gang problems in Trinidad and Tobago that really continue unabated. So there are a lot of things that have been put forward. The opposition actually released an 8-page document to the Prime Minister. Not all of the things in there are based on legislation. So, for instance, some of them are. For instance, they talk about stand your ground laws and the creation of the offense of home invasion, making it easier to for citizens to get firearms, or changing legislation to make gated communities easier or more accessible, etc. But not all of the things are legislatively based. So, for instance, they talk also about putting police officers full-time in all schools, or even increasing the complement of police officers, etc., etc. Or they talk about changes in the bail system and all of that. Of course, it will require legislation, right? So both go hand in hand. And as I said, they put forward some very good suggestions. But it's really a start. It's really a start.
Well, I would love to have seen that 8-page document, because I was looking to find, where was I finding this. I knew that the opposition leader responded on October the 14th, and and what you're saying has a lot of value in it. But you see, maybe having been in the political guile myself, it makes me take a particular point of view that maybe not, a little bit jaundiced. In other words, and this goes across the board, by the way, so it's not any particular political party at all. But it is a fact. It just appears to me that one of the things that governments will do is pass legislation and tell the man in the street, when you say, well, we pass this act, we pass that act, pass that act. Oh, what are you doing? Look, what you talking about? They're passing act. But a lot of people don't realize, I believe, the difference between passing legislation and some legislation that requires proclamation. And there's a lot of legislation in this country that is the more effective pieces of legislation that are require proclamation. And the reason why they require proclamation is because the system and structures and regulations and the appointments of persons and all the things that are necessary to enforce it, as the Prime Minister said, have to be put in place. And what comes to mind immediately, and that is why, you have, I am saying this as I hope, as the man in the street as much as I can. Sometimes one looks at this and says, is there a bit of showboating going on? We pass this and so we pass that, we pass that. But then when you go behind the passing and you look to see if the legislation has been operationalized, because there's no point if it's not. The Prime Minister said it himself, and a good example to me very recently was with regard to the Data Protection Act. And 2012, I believe it was passed in both houses, and a few parts of it were proclaimed. But the parts that were proclaimed, little or no consequence, part one. It makes little or no difference. Let's just put it that way. And when we had that whole crash of TSTT, which is, of course, exposing people's personal information, which allows them to be hacked, which allows for another level of corruption, which is a form of crime, which it's not just crime, shooting on the street, but all levels of crime. Then we find that the deputy or the permanent secretary coming out and saying they're going to serve the office by late 2024, and we will have a director by late 2024. So, what I mean to say by that, I think a big concern would be that we pass legislation, but we do not at the same time, whilst we are going through the motions of it in the parliament, that we start putting in place the regulations, the office, we put things so that within a short time frame, that legislation can come to pass. So it comes back to what I said, we are talking about how much legislation we can pass, but how effective, it's, to what extent, in your opinion then, and just as a criminologist and looking on, is this, it's a good start to say we'll have talks, but then this is another too, so much talk, so much talk, and
Right. And
you
so
go ahead.
I agree with you fully there. And a government's job isn't done when they legislate. They can't just tap themselves on the shoulder and say, okay, we've passed this, or we've, and we've thought it through. We've looked at the international law. We've looked at the local ramifications, etc. We've done our consultations. We've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. That's not enough, because it's ink on a piece of paper. It's nothing more than ink on a piece of paper until it's put in practice. So, and you're spot on there. And a very, very good example, if you remember the Cuba Children's Hospital, it was built, all the fanfare, big facility. But then if you don't think it through to what's the staffing going to cost you? What is the recurring expenditure just for staffing alone? What is the capital expenditure for x-ray machines and for operating theaters and all the kinds of equipments that you will need, etc., etc.? Then you're going to end up with a big white elephant. You end up with a big building that is empty for years and underused after having spent millions of dollars. So then it's not benefiting anybody. No children are being treated there, etc., etc. And it really amounts to the same when it comes to legislation to fight crime. We need to think it through, and it's better if we focus on something that is much more manageable legislatively, in the sense that we also try to put the things in place. And you're totally, totally right. We try to think it through from beginning to end, The legislation is the starting point, but what is the end point? You can't start and reach 25% of the way and stop. Then you're not going to achieve what you're going to achieve. And that's the model we've been using for a very, very long time. We create a piece of legislation, see how the systems that we have can work with it, or the best that they can work with it. And sometimes they can't, and then it just sits there and it doesn't really, the benefits they do not accrue at all. So you're totally, totally right. And that's a model that we need to revisit. We
But you
definitely need
see,
to revisit it.
now this is where I'm going to change a little bit on the topic about who should make up the composition of the discussion. But before I go there, I will say, and I'll have to be forgiven for having this point of view that, that's the thing about politics. Politics sometimes, politics is a good thing when it's done for the good of the people and it is followed through for the good of the people. So when people say politics, that's not true. But what makes you have a kind of a cynical approach is then you talk about all this legislation and you give people this hope. You give this people hope that, oh yeah, this is going to be dealt with. But then it makes you sometimes think, are you just going through the motions to quell opposition or to quell the, outcry? But really and truly, we're going to put it on the back burner. The other example was the procurement legislation. I mean, how long did it take for it? And even then, that's another whole discussion. But it really goes, in my respectful opinion, whilst you can say, did you think it through? Sometimes I think it's not just a question of did you think it through? It's a question of we need to be seen to be doing something, because it's not only the pressure coming from within the country. We are members of FATF, the Caribbean Finance Action Task Force. We are also subject to surveillance from international communities. And one of the measurements or metrics that they will use is whether or not we pass and we bring into it first laws, so that there is that external pressure to bring laws into effect in order to ensure that you do not find yourself either grey listed, blacklisted, or when they do a country assessment, these large international bodies, whoever they may be, that you don't find yourself being one of those countries where they say no efforts have been made to pass laws. But we passing any laws and operationalizing laws, as you said, ain't going to people. But I'm going to, because of the short time I have left with you, I'm going to raise the other issue that was brought up. And again, I don't know who's playing politics, who not playing politics or not. I really don't know. But you did mention that, which is a good point, that if you're going to put together a team, certainly the team should be persons who are subject matter experts on various areas, because otherwise, just because I hold the ministerial portfolio, yes, I will have knowledge, but a lot of my knowledge comes from my technocrats, from my support system that helps me to be able to perform my job better. I'm not saying you don't know anything, but you have technical people within a ministry, or you have consultants that you bring in to assist you so that you can provide the best service to our country. So the issue that has been brought up was that if the team, as I understand it, who is intended, is that on the government side, it would be ministers. The criticism, I think, is a valid criticism. What gives them the special knowledge? You can have people, they can sit at the table, yes, or they get the report, yes, or they can participate in some. But should you not have persons who have been down in the trenches, who can really give the kind of advice to both sides, and I go to the other side, because I think the whole argument came around with, I'm not, I don't know whether the Gary Griffith thing was put in as what do you call it, a fly in the ointment. I really can't give an opinion on that. You know what I mean? I really don't give an opinion on it, but I go to the bigger picture. I mean, who should compose those teams in your opinion?
Now, the thing is, you do have to balance the need for efficiency with the need for representativeness. You can't go too wide, but my recommendation on the matter would be to keep the team small and focused, but representative enough. But at the same time, for those people who are on the team, create a mechanism, or at least allow it to be known that they can rely on their subordinates for the information. Just as you talk about the technocrats serving as a support team for permanent secretaries and for ministers, they can rely on their technocrats. They can rely on the people on the ground, right? But at the same time, it can't just be politicians alone, because quite often politicians are non-specialists. Yes, they know a lot about their field and their ministries, but quite often they're non-specialists, right? And when you're a non-specialist in an area, very often you rely on what the technocrats may tell you. You rely on your own personal feelings of what you think may or may not work, and that's a very dangerous thing, because your personal beliefs about what may or may not work may not be grounded in the empirical reality and the research. So you need people who could speak to these things. You need people who understand the realities of the ground, on the ground. You need the academics and so forth. So I would say at the very least, you need to represent some of the core areas within the Ministry of National Security, whether it's immigration, whether it's customs, whether it's intelligence. But at the same time, we have to be mindful that the crime problem is not a problem for the Ministry of National Security alone. We have to think of it in terms of education. We have to think of it in terms of social development, etc.
Yeah.
So while you might have a core team, the core team must be properly composed so that it can reach back to these various areas that may focus on the problem, that may have an input to give that adds value, so that we can draw from all of this information to get the most comprehensive set of suggestions and solutions to the particular problem. Not only that, but it increases the buy-in, it increases the involvement and the participation of the various ministries and NGOs, etc., when you do come to the implementation phase. So this has to be a model that is very, very different. It cannot afford to be a talk shop. It cannot afford to be something just for the politics to appease the population, to make them look like something is going to happen, because perhaps an election is around the corner. We have to stop. We have to stop all of that, because this is far too serious of a problem. This is not a fun and games kind of problem that we're dealing with, right? As I said, this is a problem that is paid for in people's lives. These are not just numbers on a piece of paper. It's people's lives and livelihoods. And anybody who has been a victim of crime will attest to that.
So what would you suggest then? Because I'm not sure, let me just say, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. And I wouldn't even express it in any event, because, what I do think the concern is, people are so, a man in the street that appears, so, have become so cynical. That they look at crime almost like a political football. So when they see only apparently the composition being made up of, which has to be them too, because they are the executive, and the executive is what carries out the laws and makes sure things are become enforced and become operationalized. So there's no question that they are critical to the team. I don't know. I saw that. I mean, I don't even want to know if in Minister Young, maybe he's the right person because he's a lawyer too. Also, I mean, I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole. But I do think that if it is correct, and I am subject to being corrected, I do think that sitting at that table, I agree, it shouldn't be another a symposium, wasting time, right? It should be a tightly knit team. It should have a clear agenda. But in that clear agenda, I feel that I am of the view that the subject matter experts, it doesn't have to be 20 and, it may be 3 or 4 subject matter experts who can sit at the table to give advice to both sides. They're almost like independent of, you could say independent of both opposition and the government, and sitting in the middle, so to speak, and say, well, you know, that why there has traction in it. But these are the risks involved, or these are the concerns that I would have, and I would suggest we look at it. So you have some person sitting in the center, so to speak, 3 or 4 persons who are neither political persuasion, and giving that sort of assistance to the party, so that at the end of the day, when they come up with something, it is something that the country, because it's us, it's not them, it's us, we have to believe in it. So I'll give you the final word because you're about to end your 5 o'clock deadline. But you know, without, and you can feel free to answer it however you wish. But this, I don't hold a brief one way or the other. You know, that is for sure on this issue. You know, on the UNC side, or the opposition side, I should say, saying that they want to have Gary Griffith as part of the team, and what's the objection? And then Prime Minister saying he's not so there, you know, back and forth, and you know, all that kind of thing. You know, that kind of like a, you know, when you hear that from both sides, you know, by the way, not one side, you know, both sides, it's not looking good. You know what I mean? Okay, you know, I don't know where it almost look as though you want it to fail before it starts. You almost want to say that, well, look, we come with an idea, you know, and then we come with an idea, we get pushed back, you know. It's what you want us to do. It's not our fault. And then we could, you know, it almost feels like we're going through a charade then. That's not helpful to the country. So I don't know what your views are as the way forward. Into if you had your druthers and you could say to them, listen, we need to have that talk, that's for sure. But if I could give you an idea as a composition, as a way forward, what would be a suggestion you would make?
Right. So my suggestion would revolve around putting somebody who is neutral, who is politically neutral, but who is also extremely knowledgeable in the field of criminology. If I had to add one person to the team, that would be the person that I would add, because that brings that empirical dimension and the research dimension to it. Because quite often, you know, people's views can be out of touch with the empirical reality and the data. So you need somebody who is in touch with that kind of research background in criminology, preferably somebody grounded in the Caribbean region, but also knowledgeable of the international research. In terms of the issue of Gary Griffith, I wouldn't get into that because I don't want to get into the politics at all. But I will say that I do know of a lot of people from the TTDF, and the people with a TTDF background. They have a wealth of experience. There are a lot of very smart people, a lot of people there who are very, very knowledgeable of the security landscape. For instance, you would know that Major Best serves, he has a TTDF background and serves as the director of the SSA. So if we can put somebody like Major Roger Best in the SSA to lead an intelligence agency, why can't we bring somebody with a military background? They do have a wealth of experience and a wealth of training that is different from police, that is different from prisons, different from customs, different from immigration, etc. They have ideas that are very valuable, right? So I don't know what's the politics that surrounds it.
Politics.
It's politics. So for me, the politics really would be immaterial. I would be more concerned about what substance each participant can bring to the table, right?
I tend to agree with you. I would just say maybe more than one. I'm looking at one of them, and I think maybe two might be a good thing, just for the balance. And I do think that what has troubled having Gary Griffith at the table is because it has been so politicized, and maybe he has politicized it. The Prime Minister has politicized it, and so it's unfortunate. But I think what you're saying is probably the best thing. I do think you need some sort of neutral body as a guiding for the discussion, so that at the end of the day, when they give a report to the national community, they give a report having taken into account both sides, the recommendations from a neutral, and it should be more than one person really, persons, and I think that will help a lot in terms of giving, what should I say, credibility and buy-in, which is really, really what you do want to see at the end of the day. We want that
Absolutely.
buy-in. And we look forward to them going forward, both sides going forward, and hopefully adding to the mix neutral parties, maybe from outside of Trinidad and Tobago, even better. Um, and if it is significant, it's been so politicized. That's all I would say. It's so politicized. It's unfortunate, but I think we're on the same team. We're on the same page, and I think we reached 5 o'clock, 5:01, and I want to thank you as usual for joining us very promptly and very reliably and joining us. And thank you so much. And I don't want to say I hope to see you again, because if I hope to see you again, it's because we're going to talk crime talk.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
You too.
Right. I'm seeing somebody coming up here called Godfrey St. Clair.
Seems like he's on stage now. God, you want to
go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm with him.
And you are the director.
Yes.
On Eye on Dependency. And you're coming to me as a wonderful, like Christmas time when you were a child. I know that was eons ago. For me too, it was eons ago. But those eons ago, when you still believed in Santa Claus, and he wrapped up a gift, and he really didn't know what was in that gift. And when you open up the gift, it was a wonderful surprise. Well, you come like that gift for me.
Wow.
You have come like that gift for me, because the person whom I had expected, unfortunately, was not able to join us. So you give us then, because I know everybody is familiar with the Eye on Dependency, but could you introduce yourself, if you do not mind, to our listening audience, and so that they have a better sense of who you are? And thank you very much, Daddy Mac, because I know Daddy Mac had a lot to do with having you on, and thank you for agreeing to come on, and especially at such short notice. We appreciate it.
Now, could you just give me 1 second?
Yeah.
There's a gentleman outside the door there, and I have to lock the door. He's doing some work, and I don't want to get disturbed.
It sounded like me when I got up one time and said, like, do you mind if I have to go and get some water?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I remember one time I got a coughing fit, and got into such a bad coughing fit. I don't think it was when it was in Richard Norrie's time.
Yeah.
And I got into one coughing fit. I couldn't stop coughing.
Yeah.
I had to run off. You remember?
Yeah.
I couldn't stop coughing. I said, excuse me. And then another time, I think I had to go and close the window because they were doing some work behind there. Of course, if you could have read my mind, you wouldn't want to read my mind. The thoughts that came through my mind, but of course I couldn't express it. But I said, why all of this noise? And almost the entire show. That was the most amazing thing. But welcome back. So you locked the door.
Yes. So we're good now.
Yes, you could now. So you give us an introduction and give me an introduction. I know of it, but you tell us more about God St. Clair, the work you do as a director of Eye on Dependency, and give us a background. And I will then speak a little bit about what we were going to speak about. I have a feeling it's going to tie into what you are came.
Understood. Well, this part of my life really wasn't planned. I think this was thrust on me, having had my experience years ago. As you know, I'm a former member of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment, and coming from that.
In what capacity? Don't be shy. Let's say exactly what your position was in the regiment.
Well, I was a physical training instructor. That was my last posting.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that I was part of the crew that they got rid of unceremoniously because we indulged in substance abuse. We were introduced to crack cocaine. There was this corporal who he was working for Lily Lane at the time, And even though he was employed as a soldier, and he felt that it was a way for him to make some extra cash, so he was credited with introducing crack cocaine to the force. And I was one of them who he approached when I was doing studies for, so I could, because my ambition was to become a commissioned officer. And couldn't stay up at night. And then he convinced me, hey, this would keep you up in the night, try it. And I did try it. And after that, I just wanted to keep trying it and keep trying it. And as we know the story of addiction, how that goes, I went from a well-respected physical training instructor to that soldier who, he just changed. He just going absent. But at the time, the force didn't have a drug policy. They didn't know what hit them. When crack cocaine hit the force, they didn't know about it. And the old guards like Joe Theodore and Ralph Brown and Spencer and all of these people, they had one attitude towards substance abuse. You find them, get rid of them. So here I was now, a trained soldier, hooked on crack cocaine, and I deliberately used that because they didn't understand the connotation. They didn't understand addiction. They didn't understand that once crack cocaine got a hold of an individual, what is you expect from him. So I went back home as a trained soldier, hooked on crack, and I just couldn't stop until I started singing with a band, Kalian, and I stole all the equipment, $76,000 worth actually, and I was caught and sent to prison. And during that time in prison, that's when it hit me that I need to stop after this. What next? Because I tried rehabilitation, and I went to Cora, I went to New Life Ministries. That didn't work, and I just kept going until I was arrested and charged for larceny, and ended up in Golden Grove for 6 months. And that's when it hit me. That's when I decided to have a chat with myself and God and say, well, here what is either I continue going, because while I was there, I saw soldiers and sailors going in and out of prison, and I got scared. I said, but this is how I am going to be too. So I decided, I made a conscious decision there and then that I had enough. I had enough of running. I had enough of lying, stealing, conning to get this drug. And as a result of that, being in prison and being in that university, as I call it, because I learned a lot inside there, that gave me an option to either continue with the life or make a turnaround. And I did just that. I decided enough was enough. So when I left prison on the 11th of June, 1991, I never looked back. I just decided I need to try something else. And that's where the journey started. I eventually started singing again with Song Revolution. We went to Canada, and while I was in Canada, this band saw me up there and decided that they were going to apply for a work permit for me to stay with them. So I did that for a while, but there was something that was nagging me, something that I knew I had to try and help fix, because, like I said, back in the 80s, the early 80s, that's when this crack cocaine phenomenon grabbed Trinidad and Tobago by the scruff of the neck, and like an octopus, it spread its tentacles far and wide. So once crack cocaine hit communities, it started destroying communities one by one. And I'm sure, people who listen to this conversation could tell you in their community how many good, talented people crack cocaine destroyed. So while I was in Canada, I had this nagging feeling that I couldn't shake off, because now I have a conviction, and no matter where I go, I knew it would have followed me. So I decided to come back home and try to fix what I helped broke. What I helped to break, I decided I want to try and fix that by doing what I could. So I approached Joe Theodore, was the Minister of National Security at the time. And I remember my first Calypso contribution was Exolia's Prayer, where I called him out in the Calypso, telling him, you need to have a different approach. You all need to have a different approach to treating servicemen that you were trained to use all types of weapons, and then kick them out on the street and expect them to just turn around. It wouldn't work like that. So you need to fix it. And then I went to Brooklyn and thinking I would shake off Trinidad and Tobago and still couldn't shake it off. So I called Natasha, who is my co-host now and wife. I called her from a phone in a payphone in Flatbush, and I said, you know what, I'm coming back home. I need to fix this. We need to start a program on radio to warn people about this drug that is going to escalate, and there are going to be more drugs added to it. Because from what I heard in prison, from what I heard when I was out in the US, that these guys set up labs and they're not going to stop. So pretty soon, crack cocaine would be ordinary stuff because they're going to come with harder stuff. And we need to start warning people. So 21 years ago, we started our independency with me telling my story first. And then we had other people come and tell their stories. And, you know, like our tagline says, every life is a biography. So we started having people come, people who still using, people who recovered, people, family members who suffered. And we had them one by one come tell their stories so people could really get a grasp and understanding of what substance abuse is all about and treat with it in a different way. It's not a moral feeling, but it's a disease. Like you take a cup of tuberculosis and you drink it, or you decide to, your grandfather was an alcoholic that would pass on to your father, and you'll be predisposed in some instances. If you have 3 children, one of them would pick up the gene and they would become an alcoholic. And that is how independency started. And so far, I think we have done a good enough job in letting people know the dangers about substance abuse.
But I want to first of all, I want to thank you very much, because I know obviously know of the program and the good work that you are doing. That is really, truly giving back, you know, because a lot of people, not everybody has the capacity to be able to share, want to share, have the willingness to share their journey with others and try to help others through this difficult journey. But I want to go, as you talked about this as a disease and all what you've said, coincidentally, I'm sure you are familiar with this because you've lived in the States for some time in between. There was an explosion of crack cocaine in the so-called, you know, they like to use the code, the urban centers of United States, which are really where the so-called, minority groups live. And when they started, I don't know if you are familiar with this, but Vanity Fair, many, many years ago, did an article. And one of the advisors to President Nixon, who also went to jail because I think he was his direct advisor. I can't remember exactly. He was secretary. I don't want to give him the wrong designation, but it was a very powerful one in any event. The point that he made is that until the 1980s, when Nixon went up as president, at that time, on that occasion, they said that drugs was not really a huge problem, not the kind of way that they made it out to when it started. There's say no to drugs with Reagan, and even I think even Obama apologized. Even the former president, this was called the first black president, he had apologized for the systemic racism, because what this gentleman said, it was in the Vanity Fair article, I read it. They're taking it out to the initial article. And it is alleged that Nixon said that he knows that the hippies were against him because of the Vietnam War. So that was even before the 80s, 70s. And he said, so he knows they're not going to vote for him. And he knows the minorities are not going to vote for him. And that is where they made a distinction between cocaine and the crack cocaine.
Right.
And 3 strikes and you're out. And then you ended up spending more time because they had such strict conditions attached to the probation that at the end of the day, you ended up spending more time in jail for breaking some probation requirement than for the actual sentence. And it turned, I had one of my brothers who was at Howard University actually. It doesn't mind me mentioning him, but he's one of the ones that really gave me an insight. He did medicine. And he said, Howard, the city of that area, Howard University in the Washington area, was almost overnight turned into a prostitution and a drug ring because of the treating, first of all, introducing, so it is said, a lot of the crack more than the cocaine, making it cheaper, but with a much higher sentence than the cocaine.
Yeah.
3 strikes and you're out, so no judicial discretion if they get you with how much tiny ounce or whatever it was, and treating it as a crime and the criminals. And it was said that part of President Nixon's modus operandi was on the 5 o'clock news. They would parade a young black man who was a criminal because it was easy to get them, wasn't it? They were hanging out on the streets, right?
Yeah.
And very easy to pick up.
Yeah.
And parading them on the 5 o'clock news as another thing or another criminal. So they were able to associate drugs and crack cocaine in particular with the minority groups and treat it as a crime. However, when it came to the Midwest and they started opening up the meth labs and open up the meth labs, all of a sudden it's not a crime anymore as much as it's a disease. And it's not so much we have to incarcerate them. We need to rehabilitate them. So, a little bit understand a little bit of it, not because it's something that I and a lot of other people from Trinidad, you might be surprised, and you might be surprised the persons who have expressed those views to me, which I could never reveal that, but you'll be surprised how much attuned they are, how the change in attitude and also you see now, I've had family members go to places like Oregon, Portland, Oregon, going there on a vacation, they said, and the 10 cities off of Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
LA, right? And the mental health legislation there, from my understanding of it and my reading of it, is that unless you are a danger to someone else, but they have really turned over mental health, and that's the drugs. A lot of these people are on drugs. They're hooked on drugs. I mean, the person who was telling me this. So I mean, they don't bother you, but they are mostly white Americans, drugging up themselves, shooting up themselves with the meth, and just living on the streets. And all of a sudden, we have to take a different approach to a problem which you have said and probably identified many, many, many years ago.
Yes.
That it is a disease. So if it is a disease, how do you cure the disease? Do you give it Panadol or do you give it a good dose of amoxil? And I find, to be honest, that we want to give you Panadol. It might even only want to give you one Panadol, by the way, right? Yeah. And that is what concerns me, because before I let you take back over again, because the person who was coming on, I did go and look up and see, okay, let's see what measures. That broken windows thing with Giuliani, I will let you speak on it if you know about it, but I have researched it to show you the underlying racism of it, that empirically proven not to work, but had been lauded. He was even invited in Trinidad to come and talk.
Yes.
About this broken windows, which at the back of it all, it was, and no question, that is what empirical data has shown, because the numbers have shown it has been driven by bias confirmation. Bias confirmation, once you're a minority, you are guilty of. So if you're standing on the street side, you're not talking to your friend, you're loitering to sell drugs.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear What are the solutions? Where is the amoxil for this disease?
Well, first of all, what you to go back to what you said, I think when the initial plan was to target a certain group of people, but when they realized that there are people getting involved too as well and falling through the cracks just as fast, then the whole language changed, and I think that was the main issue. That because even we could even go back to the to this general, what's his name? Oh gosh, he's lose me now. Um, when
In
they
South America?
yes,
Yeah,
um,
we went to the
remember it's
gun.
North General North is his name, but
Yeah,
he
Darren North, and he took all the papers and he destroyed them.
yes, and yes, and remember he was one who was charged with trafficking drugs too as well. Being part of the whole um
Into the inner cities,
in
codes
in
and
a
codes.
city. Yes, and but when they realized that once it started to affect their people, then all of a sudden now the language changed, and I could even go so far back as to bring in this brother Bob Marley, deceased Bob Marley, when they realized that he started a trend with white people growing dreads too, and realized that hey, this thing's too infectious and it's starting to get up, and well, Bob Marley died mysteriously. So yes, you're
He
correct.
died of cancer, they said, huh?
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
had a hole in his leg and
Hmm.
he
Yeah.
died of cancer. So let me just put that out there before you get me in trouble. Okay, you are-
Died of cancer. Yes, I forgot. He died of cancer. So but the
yeah,
thing
that's
is,
right.
the thing is, I think this is a horse already bolted.
It is?
Yeah, I think so. You see, there are too many big people involved. Now, I can tell you for a fact that just as the drug is addictive, the money is also addictive.
There you go.
So that why I could tell you if and I had that option when I was in prison, that I could have gotten some cocaine on consignment.
Mhm,
And as the guy said to me, within 6 months you could buy a house in Westmoreland.
mhm.
I say, that sounds good.
Westmoreland? Why you want to go down to Westmoreland?
meaning that meaning that I make enough money to buy a house wherever I want,
Mhm.
and painting that picture of having that huge house wherever you want. Um, this is what it brings. Now, fortunately, I was already at a place when I said, no, I have seen too many people destroyed by it, and then there were pushers who to this day they would meet me and congratulate me and feel good because they saw me when I was at my lowest point, and they decided that they're going to stop pushing cocaine too because they saw what it was doing to their community. But the thing is, because of as just as the drug is addictive, making that money, and when you see that fast turnover of you buy, let's say, an ounce, and you could step on that a few times and get three more times the rocks, and you push that out there. Remember, there was a time when pushers started selling 24 because they were
What's
making so much money
24? Now, not that I might know a little bit, but I don't know to that much. So what is the 24?
around the clock. Just
Huh?
so
Oh,
round the clock.
24 hours.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
when we started buying cocaine, you have to try and get by the pusher by at least 12 o'clock because after that you're not seeing anybody. But then when they decided, wait a minute, people coming and calling all 2, 3 in the morning, for drugs. So they started having shifts. So pushers had people working different sometimes 4 hour shifts for them. And because of the amount of money that it was making. And because of that, they got addicted to the money. And that addiction is so strong that this is what I'm saying is a horse already bolted. Because remember, the guy on the ground, he getting that from somebody who getting that from somebody. And the way it starts, they make a ton of money. So this is why they're so brutal when it comes to paying back what you owe them. Because I mean, even when a shipment is caught, the
Yeah,
people who
there are
inject,
a lot of murders.
there's a lot of murders because of it, because
Yeah, but they lose the shipment. They had to
exactly,
pay with your life.
which could amount to, let's say, couple $100 million, you
Mm.
know. So when because you tell me it's safe, where I sitting in wherever is Colombia or wherever, and you come to me and say,
You lose my shipment.
and you use my shipment,
I want
when
to
you
hear that.
convince me that it was safe, there's no excuse, there's no getting out of that. You have to die. To
That's
send
right.
a message to whoever else coming to me or coming to us, to know that you taking the shipment, you better know what you're doing. Because anytime it's intercepted, you have to answer. You know?
So
So it's
let me try and before I go on my hobby horse, which I am very strong on. I want to because and I want to give you a chance to respond to these things. The person who was coming on, who unfortunately was not able to join us, and I gave an undertaking, and I was absolutely going to stick to that undertaking, that the discussion would really be about how, and I wish people could call in or Daddy Mark, if anybody writing anything or saying anything, please let them go ahead and do that. There, I looked up this going online. I like to go online and try to educate myself on stuff. And there was an article on crime. No, this was in Canada, so I'll put that in perspective. But the thing about it, it says it was a crime prevention that really works, that succeeds. That was the key, that it had results. And they had four basic programs that they said were had results, and they actually gave you the percentage in terms of results. I'm gonna mention them to you and ask you your views on them because I'm sure you're familiar with all of them,
sure.
right? And one of them was the Youth Inclusion Program, and it is mainly in the targeted 72 priority neighborhoods in that program, and the age group was between 15 to 16. And what they did is they monitored them, they helped them with their homework, helped them to build up skills, get them involved in activities, and they said that, and also discourage them from give them assistance with dealing with persons who were trying to recruit them to join gangs, and so on and so on. And they said that 65% of the youth that were part of the program, they were able to get them to not to go on drugs, and that they reduced the crime in that area by 13%. That's one. Let me give you the others, and then you will give me your point of view. Everybody knows our big brother, big sister. I mean, it's an American program, but I think we are familiar with it. But it's the age group. They start at a younger age. They intervene from 6 to 18 years. They partner you with this is usually in single parent families, and they partner you with someone, an adult, hopefully the right type of adult, who will give early intervention to lower the likelihood that they would get involved in a life of crime. So they spend a certain number of hours per day, per week or per month with that young person, being a guidance and being a big brother or big sister. And according to what they said with the program that they had, it had 46% reduction in drug use and 38% less likely to be involved in violence. And the third one, and they gave you the cost, and it wasn't really exorbitant. And the last one, which I thought was a good one too, even for Trinidad too, in particular, all of them I think are going to be helpful. I mean, why not? Family and early childhood education. It's not the early childhood care where you send the child to school, but it's really focusing on the parent. It really focuses on the parent, and for a lot of the parent to give them a positive parental skills to help them to get over a lot of their struggles, financial, mental, emotional struggles, and help them to deal with the issue of disciplining their children in a more appropriate way, and help them, in other words, them as well as their children, And they're saying that that has helped a lot of, and they go from 0 to 12 years, and they have had pretty good results with that. And last thing I will say before I hand it back over to you to hear what you think of that and any other programs that can help. I know what program can help. All of this is Panadol, by the way. Everything I tell you there is Panadol, eh? Okay? I'm telling you straight up, I talk in Panadol, but we talk in Panadol for the moment.
Right.
I mean it, because you yourself said it. You said it have to come from somewhere. Wherever it's somewhere it come from, that's where the amoxil has to happen, and it's not happening. Okay, so you could give me Panadol, 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 Panadol all down the line, and if you don't deal with the amoxil at the beginning, then you spin it up in one. But these things can help. These things can help. And it reminded me of the incident that I was at a meeting where this young person was saying that this mother poisoned her child, her 3-year-old child, with rat poison. The child didn't even have a birth certificate. The child had not been seen by the hospital since its birth, and the conditions under which the mother was living,
Right.
obviously was not mentally stable. So I guess what I'm trying to say, therefore, you have a criminal in the making, because they say the number one thing, you said it, it's money. The number one draw is going to be the almighty dollar. So, what are your views on those programs? What can be done from your experience apart from those programs? What you think of them, and what would you add in the context of Trinidad and Tobago and your experience in a very broad way? I don't want to tell in tales of the school, of course not. But in your experience, what you think would be the most effective way? The amoxil is the best, but while we dealing with Panadol, as we deal with the Panadol, what would you recommend? I'm sorry. That's all.
Well, I mean, as we know, amoxil treats a number of issues, right? But let's start with the parents first. I agree
Yeah.
with that one, because in this era, that's a problem. And I say that because when I speak with, have speaking engagements here, there, and everywhere with young people, especially during vacation time, what some of these young people, and young people really don't put water in their mouth to say anything, right? They're very frank. And while I speaking with them, and then one would say, "But sir, my father, every time I having dinner, he would come and light a joint right around the table." Now, you telling these children about the danger of substance abuse, but then they're going back home to a parent or parents who smoking cigarettes, who drinking alcohol a lot, have alcohol accessible to everybody in the home, and they're using drugs in front of them. So, and the thing is, a child can't tell a father, "Well, daddy don't smoke around the table now." I say, well, what you need to do is get up and move and go in the bedroom, and let him understand that what he's doing is hurting you by smoking around you with that secondhand smoke. And so right now, there is a dire need for parent camps. So how we doing it, I don't know. But we have to pull in parents now and let them know how they're operating. In this time here, it's only damaging their children. And these are the same parents who would go by the school and sweat during SCA time and hoping that their child passed, but then understand that before their child brain develop at the age of 25, they're giving them alcohol to use at home for the worms. They're giving them drugs to use. And giving some of these parents, giving them drugs to take in school to sell. So we need classes for parents like yesterday. So I agree with that, where that they're reaching out to families and parents now and trying to educate them. I agree with that totally. That is really needed right now in Trinidad and Tobago, because I mean, you know how we grew up. When big people were speaking, we couldn't be around them. Now a mother will have her child on her lap and bad talk everybody in the village, including the government, and bad talk the system, and bad talk. So that child now getting information that they shouldn't have,
Anger, a lot of anger too.
and building up a lot of anger in them, so that this is, I think that too is a very, very serious problem in Trinidad and Tobago with regard to parenting. And it's quite obvious from the young lady who we saw with that video that went viral that you could call your mother and say, Mommy, come here now because this effing teacher saying so, and I want to deal with this effing teacher.
Mm.
You know you can call your mother and even raise your voice. Now a child feel comfortable enough to use obscene language to her mother. And so and that therein lies the problem. So I agree with that totally. But my with all the others that you
Big
outlined,
brother, big sister. What about the big brother, big
right?
sister?
The big brother, big sister, it can work, but then um with the consent of the parents, of course. Now, how would all parents agree to that in Trinidad and Tobago? That's another story. But and then remember, we have another situation where we have adults with very dirty minds
Very
to
true.
get their
That
hands
is
on people's children.
that
You
is
know,
it.
so
That's
and they ride among us, they live among us. You know what
very
I mean? From top to bottom. You know, and we wouldn't name any names or call any institution, but
true.
you know what I'm talking about. That they exist. And in some well-respected places too, so we can't even trust them to have that situation going on. And then our vetting process here is very poor, you know. So that my and then with the 15 to 16 category, what I've noticed that there are a number of parents who would call us and tell us about they have a 14-year-old. Do you have any programs for a child 14 or 13 years? Some 13-year-old using hard drugs, and parents are up in arms now to find, but no rehab center would take anybody under the age of 18. So what do you do? What do you do with a child who was introduced to marijuana, who is predisposed because her father was suffered mental ill health, and this child now have the gene and is affected child and start to go through psychotic episodes, experience psychotic episodes, and challenging the mother and breaking up things in the house. Yes, they have the family court, but then you need something stronger than the family court because this child is not going to be institutionalized. They're going back home to the very parent who they're terrorizing. So what I think is that we should start um, having, intervention programs from as early as 14, and now with the youth inclusion program. Listen, I have one solution for that. We talk about it for years, and we don't seem to have the cojones to really implement it. But mandatory youth service, I think, is the only that's the amoxil. Because what I notice is having dealt, and I could cite two people, Natasha De Leon, that name might sound familiar,
Yes, it is.
and another young brother called Andrew Douglas. These two people are perfect example of what I'm talking about. They went to prison when they both were 18 for murder. They left school with nothing. Natasha, well, her story is a little different because her mother was a crack addict, and her mother just up one day and decide she going out there and hunt crack cocaine, and for a whole year she never looked back on Natasha. And Natasha was 15 at the time. Natasha was left to take care of two other siblings. So what happened is that she fell into of course, you leave a child to her own devices, young, pretty little girl, and she has to take care of them. She's not working, she's unemployable. She dropped out of school. So she ended up on a crime spree. She was sentenced to death at the age of 21. But she has 8 subjects now. Andrew Douglas has 12 subjects. Now, these are two people who didn't even leave school with school leaving. For some reason, they couldn't settle down in school. But when they reached prison, they were able to settle down and get all their passes. What does that say? So we have to cut off the pipeline from school to prison. And the only way to do that is, okay, you have your 5 years in school, you're in secondary school, you take your 5 years. But once we finish and you have no academic qualification or vocational skill, then the only thing you could do is get in trouble. When you go out there, you're unemployable. And what we're doing now is we actually supplying right now bodies to gang leaders. because once they're not qualified, they can't get a job. They can't read a measuring tape to save their life, and they have no skill. So then what do? They go on the block. Somebody see them. They couple days they go, and somebody might say, hey, "Youth man, come now," and that is how it starts. We have to cut off that supply, and the only way we can cut off that supply is when you finish school and you're not qualified or skilled in anything, then you come to this program, and and this will be a residential program. It wouldn't be like the CCC, um, where you could go and come, because with the CCC, I even recommended that they have daycare centers set up in all 8 regions, so that they would even catch the young lady who is pregnant, who has a child already, and she would want to come CCC, but then she cannot pay a babysitter. So a lot of them try and they drop out. But if you open up daycare centers in each region, then you start teaching parenting from there too. So you could kill a few birds with one stone right there, So you start teaching them parenting, because a lot of young ladies getting pregnant very early and they don't even know how to be a parent. So my thing is, you have the MyLab program on the ground already, expand it. We have enough instructors, past and present, who can, fill the manpower and get people from school straight to there. So that way, you create a drought of young men running idle on the street. And that is what I think that is missing. And I think the Minister of Education came close to say it. Well, she said it, because we have been trying to convince, past from Mrs. Manning come right up, every education minister, listen, the drug situation in school is going to get worse, and you have to do something about it. Nobody took us on. This minister decided, well, I'm going to say it, and she said it. But then what are we doing about it? That's it. That's the next story. So my amoxil, as you to use your term, will be a mandatory youth service program, and that way, when gang leaders looking for gang members, they wouldn't find them, because the ones out here, they qualified and they can look for a job, and the ones who are not qualified, they're in a program. Now, if your parent decide, I don't want my child going in that program, because that is what stopped the discussion too, right? I don't want my child in that program, so let's be with them, and so let's this and that and the next. Okay, then what do you have for your child to do? Tell us. Because you have a skill.
You know what they have for the child to do? Mom, hold that.
Yeah.
And that's what they have. Mom,
Yeah.
hold that. And mom not going to ask him, oh, yeah, that thing. She's going to ask him questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why mom might want to go there.
Yeah, exactly. Because when Brian leaving, she said, Brian, bring bread when you come in. Mommy, I have no money, Don't bring bread now. So right away, that indirectly says to Brian,
find it somewhere.
You can bring bread by any means necessary. And this is what empowers some of them. Because if my mother, endorsing what I doing, then, I sorry, sir, I had to take this money from here, because it's no bread home.
Yeah, actually, we had where I live, it wasn't bread they wanted. They wanted our iguanas, and which I used to like to watch the iguanas. I never knew that I would like iguanas, but I got almost attached to them, because I'd see them climbing up the tree. But it comes to your point, because they did climb over the however they got over, and they spoke to the person, individual behind the sanctity or security of his window. They didn't have any ammunition or guns or anything like that. They're young boys. But what they said was this: boss, we have to eat, We have to eat, We hungry, We have nothing to eat, When you think you have something to eat, I have to feed myself. I have to feed my brother. I have to feed my sister. So, and so, that is reality for so many. And these are young men. They did not have any guns or anything. So, but I have not seen iguanas for quite a while. So I assume that they have it's sad. It's sad on so many ways. But let me ask you one more thing before I ask you your opinion too on this. I think a chance up in a way, some of where we're going to go with those things. They're NGOs. That's what I think we as a nation have to take responsibility, and those who can't should. There was someone who I didn't like at all, but they did say something that made sense, and it stayed with me. And it was that to the effect that those who, in other words, those who have, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was well put. Basically saying, to whom much is given, much is expected. That was what he said was, to whom much is expected. And though I did not care for the person, I said, that's a true saying. That's a true saying. So there are many people, it may not be a huge amount of people, but we're not here to talk economics and Gini coefficient and GDP and things. So we aren't talking all that talk. But what I am confident about, there is a small minority in this country because of drugs alone, the value that of cocaine and so on, that there are people who may not even be involved in it, but who indirectly benefit, however they do, working in business, whatever. And they can form themselves into small NGOs. I have a foundation, and I never ever speak about it. And one of the reasons I don't speak much about it is because I was hoping that Gulfview Medical Center, against whom I won my medical negligence case after 17 years of putting me through, but I went to the Privy Council, and it's since 2023 I won, and I had intended, I thought I would have won earlier, to rename the foundation after him, because as you know, you may know that my husband came from Nelson Street.
Yeah.
He was there, his father was a prison officer. And in those days, many of our upstanding citizens, including our former Chief Justice, many people who I could name, came from Nelson Street back in the day, right? And he had his Grissom boys. He was very well known for doing charity work, involved in football, steel band. I mean, I knew that was my husband. And I had a foundation. I do have a foundation, and we do give to people in need, mainly persons who scholarship grants to the different communities as they may be. But I would have liked to do much more, and I want to do much more. And there are people who can do so. To answer your question about how do we finance all these things, it doesn't have to always be the government. We in the communities can come together, and they do have people who do it. They do have people who do it, and they do get support from the government, because one in particular group that I shan't call the name of the entity, when I heard the person speak, it swore they themselves alone, and this one particular person was responsible for the success of the entity. So I went up and looked it up online, and I'm not giving the government anything because, I don't think we and them are the best of friends, but I like to be fair. It said that the government pays the salaries, the stipends, infrastructure, and maintenance. Obviously, it will never be enough. But it was unfair to say that the government does nothing. But
Right.
what are you doing? I went to St. Joseph Common, Port of Spain. St. Joseph Common, Port of Spain may have a big lab. Some I understand now, some of these, not in my day anyhow, but I understand some of the classes air conditioned, because you have a PTA, a strong PTA, and you have people who are able to contribute. In the United States of America, people who have gone to universities, and you know that, they will go and donate millions of dollars to a school that they went to. Maybe they'll get it named after them, I don't know. But they will donate, and they are giving back because they benefited, their family benefited, and hopefully the generations to come will benefit. There are a lot of people who are holding CEO positions in this country, who are holding big positions in this country, who, aside from what their company does as part of their civic responsibility, they themselves, because they have benefited from going to those very same schools that they all love to say, I know it. When you ask somebody what school you went to, when they talk, unless they went to Harvard or Yale or Cambridge or one of them big shot schools, they are going to tell you, oh, I went Saints, I went Convent, I went Fatima, I went, nothing wrong with that, but it shows the pride you have that you went there and your child went there and your father went there and everybody there. But there is a responsibility that we need to adopt from the American system. I think that people who have gone to those schools, who have turned out CEOs, and people who are living in the diaspora with big positions, making big dollars. Now, I am not accusing anybody because I don't have the data, but it seems to me that they can do more to help organizations like yourself, even if they don't want to head it up, rather than giving a donation every now and again. There are people who are retired who have held senior positions in organizations, who know HR, who know how to organize, and then will be able to assist people like yourself, Godfrey and Clair, in doing the work. And I think sometimes we all, in a sense, are guilty of saying the government. Now, I will say this. You may not like me to say this, but I'm going to say it to God. I'm going to say it because I believe it. I truly believe it. And I believe it because maybe I'm a politician, maybe I was inside there. Sometimes I think they like it just so, meaning the politicians. Sometimes they like to have them CPAP workers who can't work for. What kind of money you making in CPAP? And after URP, when they put you every 3 weeks, you get on a cycle, and you're better supporters as you ain't getting a work. And the kind of money you're getting can't mine a parrot on a stick. And when you put people in a situation of abject poverty, living in urban community, and this is the other thing too, putting this demographic argument that angers me, and we buy it and we sell it too, right? Why don't we have guns are shooting in Tobago, guns are shooting in Toco, guns are shooting in Point Fortin, guns are shooting in Maruga? You know why you don't have that? Because those are rural communities, and these people operate in urban poverty communities. And because of the demographics of our country, we see, but they cannot afford those guns, because there was a paper done in the Guardian that told you one of them guns is between $11,000 to $15,000 for one of those guns. Who working on CPEP and URP? 20,000 of our citizens, according to the statistics I was given, are in URP CPEP. So you start to think, is this by chance that you have a recruitment fodder, a set of young people? Because if you say money makes the world go round, the money going making the world go round for those outside of these communities. So why you vex for the ones inside the communities doing the same damn thing you doing? But instead of you having 20 houses, you only have a pair of sneakers, right? Okay, so let us get real. And don't tell me that what I'm talking about is amoxil. The amoxil is outside of these communities. And unless you disrupt that trade, you will be spinning top in mud. You could try as hard as you want. The allure of money, that is what have them in the trade. That's what has the trade going around. Why should the little young boy whose mother has to work in a franchise, coming home all kind of quality hours, working for all kind of zero money, that can't even buy bread? Somebody told me a loaf of bread is $16 and Blue Band is $46. Talking thing, but telling me them kind of figures and saying that what you expect when they have to lock up the baby milk, special milk, is lock it up in some of the thing. They lock up the alcohol. Why you in decent supermarkets they're doing that? So why are you putting the blame on these young boys who shooting when somebody gets shot? Mr. God Sinclair, you know somebody call that shot. And if they find out, I understand, I am a lawyer, I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I know when you are the one who called the shot to kill the person, but you ain't fired, you didn't pull the trigger, go to you and the person who pulled the trigger going in jail, and you go in jail for longer, So when you're telling me about the amoxil, I sorry, Mr. God Sinclair, all them plans, you spinning top in mud, as long as you have CPEP and URP as a recruitment fodder in urban communities, as long as you have mothers who do not make a living wage, and cannot see their way out, as long as you allow those conditions to remain unattended, you are spinning top in mud unless you cut off the source. That's what they did in America.
Yeah.
The U.S. Security Council, I have a report, but I am going to read it out to you today. They said that they went and they cut it off in the Central America Isthmus by the interdiction. And when you disrupt the trade, you think Colombia cares about Trinidad? Colombia only cares to get their drugs to United States and Europe. If it become too hard to bring it in here, and it's making it too difficult and they're losing too much product when they bring it in here, because guess what? The maritime equipment working, the scanners working, the legislation being enforced, right? The FIU working, the TTRA up and running, the Gambling Commission not only up and running, and all kinds. I could go on and on. When they see the net start to close in on them, you don't think they understand what you're doing to them? You didn't fire a shot, you know. You didn't fire a shot. But they get the message. You see things getting too serious there. Don't worry to arrest anybody. What are you arresting anybody for? Look at the airport scandal. Anybody in jail yet? The CL Financial, which I wish the Prime Minister would release. For some reason, he doesn't want to release it. I beg him to do it. Please do it, Prime Minister. Right? Why are you not releasing it? Why are you not releasing it? Right? Is any of them get locked up yet? You see any of them in a jail as yet? No, darling, they're not going to jail. Because you cannot deal with the problem, God Sinclair, unless you disrupt the trade. And if the Colombians or the Venezuelans, whoever it is, because we don't grow cocaine here, as far as I'm aware. And we make guns here, as far as I'm aware. So however it's coming in, if you make it, they're losing too much product, so it's not financially feasible anymore. Whoever is there, a Moxel person in Trinidad, they're going to say, sorry, boss, we have to move on. And guess what? Then you have a fighting chance. Then you have a fighting chance with all those programs. But until you stop that seduction of the money, and you cannot tell those young people they shouldn't do it. You know why? Because they're living in the urban communities and they're seeing the big boys driving Mercedes, driving Range Rover, car done, 5 Range Rovers, changing it like every day, opening up business, closing business, doing what they want, living a lifestyle that they couldn't even begin to imagine. And when they're seeing it and they know where it's coming from, you're going to tell them not to go and take a sneakers or pay their girlfriend to do a weave or to do her nails or go to a show and then you're going to tell them not to do that? Or you going to tell them that? What moral authority you have to tell them one thing? You have none, because you do not want to deal with you do not want to disrupt the trade. And until a government is serious about disrupting that trade by enforcing the laws, by doing what it has to do, only then, because it's a whole generation you have lost, you know. There are young people that I know you know better than me, that there are such young people who might even think it's glamorous to die. Because I've seen some of the videos and it's unfair. It's unfair because what you're doing is you're only putting videos of those little boys, but there are a lot of persons of that same color who are Island School winners, who are head girls of St. Joseph Convent, who are the top chess players in this country called Trinidad and Tobago, who have gone to MIT. I know them because anyway, however I knew them, right? So you don't talk about them. You don't talk about them because you don't give them the opportunity and you don't empower. You talk the talk. And the data, one last point, you see that Data Protection Act is a good example. When I heard the PS come and talk about how we're setting up the thing in late 2024, so I said, look back and see when this law was passed, 2012. So what you were doing is when TSTT thing mash up and fall down here, all of a sudden you say the end 2024. Don't you understand there is a lack of credibility and a lack of trust, which is the foundation of government? And until you are prepared to stop outside of the cabinet running the cabinet and deal and disrupt that drug trade. Every single plan you have, including the broken windows thing, which is proven to be a waste of time with Giuliani, which is race itself, right? He has been empirical data shown that it is not true. They said New York City, by the way, was already recovering. Dinkins, who was a black mayor, had already made a changeover, and that when they relocated these persons to different neighborhoods, i.e. down in Long Island, they just took the problem and moved it out of the city from 42nd Street down into those areas. And they used the cover of this general thing of you looking suspicious, loitering, and all kinds of reasons to unfairly target people of minority. And when they did the statistical data on it, they found out, I wrote it down, if they stopped 150,000 persons for those, driving to look for drugs or guns or whatever it is, 1/15 of 1% of them had guns. But you targeted disproportionately bias confirmation. So I am telling you, Mr. St. Clair, I am very sorry. Maybe it's a good thing the gentleman didn't come, because I wouldn't have said what I said out of respect for him. But I am telling you, Mr. St. Clair, every plan that you could come with, everyone is doomed to fail as long as money is in the equation. And that is the truth. And that amoxil is the amoxil to disrupt the trade. And until you do that, we in this country will not be able to take our young people and give them a fighting chance to become entrepreneurs in their own right, have a sense of self-worth and self-value, and stop self-hatred and allowing the TikToks and these videos to portray them in a negative light, because there's domestic violence going on. That's a crime, but it's going on behind doors. Let's see what's going on behind your closed doors. Let's see what's going on behind your closed doors, right? So I think we have to be very, very careful when we talk that talk, and we ourselves join into that conversation and say as if it is a problem of urban poverty, and the demographics of Trinidad and Tobago that's why it's in Port of Spain, and that's why they are the recruitment fodder, and that is why the continuation of CPEP and URP are perfect recruitment fodder for those who wish to recruit persons to do their dirty work. And that is my view on the matter.
I hear you.
God, sorry. Oh God, daddy back. You shouldn't have let me talk,
But I think God is very instrumental in doing at least more than 150% work with the young people, and I certainly wish him the best, and I hope that he can get the support to take it to
NGOs. And God, you're doing a wonderful job. I don't take what I said as any reflection on you. I praise you. It's 6:03. I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble already. I want to tell you, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being so open with us, sharing your story with us, and being an inspiration for so many people who find themselves in your situation. And you are not the government. You are not the executive. You do your part. And we appreciate you for what you do for our country, Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. And, I'm all to say, anytime you all need. David, thanks a lot for the invitation, my friend.
Yes, I couldn't find another person.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye, my Christmas present.
Thank you, God.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk, Power 102 Digital Monday.